We're talking about microfrictions and how they drain your brain. And the question I asked myself when I created this talk was microfrictions and how everyday interruptions, unclear processes, and redundant steps increase cognitive load, reduce working memory, and erode efficiency. They're like sand in the machine. They're just very small, but cumulatively they just wear down the cogs and slow down everything. What does that mean for us, for our daily life? And this is where I've created this to make it a little more practical. So the prefrontal parietal disruption is the experience that we have is, okay, I lost my thread. So what was the train of thought that I had? And this kind of long-term leads to a doubt in our own competence, and we start doubting our own self-efficacy. Thank you all for being here. We're talking about microfrictions and how they drain your brain. So let's start with how we define microfrictions, which actually comes from the Industrial Revolution and from those type of old-fashioned machinery, but it's being applied to the workplace and also to computer programs, to UX and UI design. But we'll talk about the workplace. So microfrictions, there are those very tiny, teeny little unnoticed barriers to workflows, and that are interruptions, unclear processes, and redundant steps. Just for this talk, there are obviously lots more, but that would have exploded the scope of this talk way too much. And we think of a single penny. A single penny is not heavy, but if you have 100 or 1,000 pennies, it becomes very heavy very fast. So what do those microfrictions do? So they're like sand in the machine. They're just very small, but cumulatively they just wear down the cogs and slow down everything. It's similar to if you have too many programs open on your laptop or your computer. Unless it's some super powered machine, it can really slow down things. So in order for you all to really experience this, I would like to give you just a few seconds to remember this string of numbers. And I'll give you a second, and then we'll hide those numbers. And before you recall those numbers, I ask you, what did you have for lunch or for dinner 2 days ago? Yes. And what is a meal maybe 3 days ago that you liked really, really a lot? And then try to recall those numbers. And well, if anybody of you wants to share how they did, but obviously you don't have to, because probably most of us are listening to it during work. So yes, so Tricia, maybe you can say how well you did with that.
I've got 528 and 36.
Yes.
149 disappeared because I was thinking about lunch.
Yeah, exactly. So this is working memory, and working memory is mostly a number, something between 4 and 8, often 7. That is the amount of information we can hold in our head at that given moment. And this depends on rehearsal to keep the information active. So if you have children, they will sit here 5, 7, 3, 8, 9, and they'll sit there and will repeat that until memorized it. And what happens is the interruption trying to think of lunch 2 days ago forces our brain to gauge, reallocate, and reconstruct the information again. So again, we don't multitask. Our brain just tries to reconfigure with the limited amount of workspace that we have. And so what are the neural mechanisms? We're looking at those neural mechanisms of interruption. So yes, it disrupts the prefrontal parietal circuits, and it lowers alpha and increases theta and so on. But what does that mean for us, for our daily life? And this is where I've created this to make it a little more practical. So the prefrontal parietal disruption is the experience that we have is, okay, I lost my thread. So what was the train of thought that I had? And this kind of long-term leads to doubt in our own competence, and we start doubting our own self-efficacy. And what else it does when we're interrupted, alpha drops, is my head feels noisy because I have too many things going on at the same time, or I have too many thoughts that are competing. And this makes us chronically distracted, and it can make us very irritable. And maybe you've noticed that when you're at work and there have been too many interruptions, too much going on, and suddenly you notice this underlying irritability. And that can be, yes, maybe your sugar is low. It can be a lot of things, but this is one of the side effects of being interrupted a lot. And then here we had the rise in theta, which is like, oh gosh, I'm so exhausted and I have no idea why. And this just means that all those interruptions make us more sensitive to stress, and which of course also increases burnout risk. So this is not a small thing like, hey, do you have a second? Somebody popping their head into our office and just asking something, or the next bling for some Teams chat or some other work chat that we have. Those things have serious long-term consequences for us. And then we have the whole thing with the gating fatigue, which we had up here. And it just means that in that moment, we feel like, oh, I really can't decide what matters. What is more important? Is it this or is it that? And that can long-term lead to something like learned helplessness and a reduction in motivation. So how does interruption look like in the brain? And this is just an image, what happens on an EEG. So here, the gray part, so this is the whole loop, and here is the interruption, and it needs to reform, and you can see that here after the interruption. And if you're interested to go more deeply into the science, those are two research papers that I'm basing it from, and this image is from the Zickerick research paper. And so you see the whole smooth oscillation, and then it kind of gets distorted, and then you have this recovery going on. And that is what happened when we did the exercise before, where I asked you to memorize those numbers, and then I ask you about your lunch and about your food, or it could have been anything. I could have asked you to do some kind of mental math or something, and the same thing would have happened. And this is what happens at when we're interrupted. Also at work, when we try to work on something complicated in a project, and then we take a phone call for something very unrelated, and it kind of just gets us out of this flow, or even it prevents us from going into a flow state, which would make us feel good about our work. So now again, because I'm a big fan of a workshop, because just giving you all this information, I feel puts all of us to sleep. So maybe you just take a moment and list 5 small interruptions that you experience regularly.
Should we put them in the chat, Gwen?
Yes, that would be awesome if you can just, put, or even just a single interruption that you face regularly. Okay, anyone?
I've just popped something in there, which is a regular interruption for me is my dog's barking.
Oh, well, that's a nice one, isn't it?
I work from home.
Yes.
But actually, if it was to do with my systems and devices and apps, it would be WhatsApp, because I use that for business. And that is a constant in the background.
Yes. Yes, too many communication tools at the same time. That's a big one. And yes, work-related emails, if we have notifications on, they will just bling and make some noise or just pop up. Okay, so all of those feed into our cognitive load. And here we have this image of all those things going on at once, and our brain desperately trying to stay focused. And this is where we have all of those feeding into the cognitive load, and we have a lot of that going on today. And it's really like an overheated boiler system. And this means that we have a finite capacity for that, because all of that mental effort trying to hold all those balls, like somebody juggling balls, trying to hold that together and still staying focused on our goals makes it very hard and very stressful. So each bling, each chat, each new email that pops up or another meeting interrupting the flow of thought adds to the load that we're dealing with. And so looking at this and what does that really mean in our daily life is that if we have back-to-back meetings, and we've all experienced that, we start at 9 in the morning and at 5 our last meeting ends and we have the feeling we didn't work at all, that means we have no recovery period. And each meeting after that, we get more tired, we're less able to take in things or be the person that we could be in the next meeting. And it just drains us. And I think all of us have experienced that at some point. And that leads long term to this chronic mental fatigue. We feel like, gosh, I really need a break. I really need a vacation or something, because we just need to juggle so many things at once. And it's this whole thing, it just constantly requires from our brain to reload the goal. And we feel like we're behind all the time because there's so many messages that needs to be answered. And personally, I've had that where I've realized, oh, 3 days ago, I got this WhatsApp message and I didn't even read it because it just kind of fell down in the hierarchy. So we have this really high information load, and that makes us push our decisions further and further away, because making a decision is hard for our brain because we need to weigh the pros and cons. Is it really important to make the decision now? And what are the consequences and all that? So we fall into trying to keep trying to make it as easy as possible because we're so tired. And this leads to avoidance and to procrastination and to pushing hard things away, which also can lead to us overeating or also overindulging in social media or Netflix or anything like that. And all those competing priorities, they try to capture our attention, and attention is this currency our modern life really runs on. Every software, every ad, everything we deal with every day competes for our attention. And this leads long term that it's really hard for us to engage in strategic thinking because our attention is just so fractured. And yes, so here is some research on that. And so we started off, when I started this talk, I said that it's three things that we're having here. So it's the way we define microfriction as interruptions, unclear processes, and redundant steps. So let's go a bit into the redundant processes. And I know it's a bit of a trick question, is what do you think how good you are at multitasking? And just maybe take a second to reflect on that. In popular culture, we have a lot like, okay, women are able to multitask better than men, which we know is not exactly the case. And we don't really multitask, but we task switch. We switch between two tasks because we can't do the two things at the same time. And so maybe just take a second to question, how good do you think you are at doing this? Okay, so is anybody wanting to write something? Yeah, you're somebody wrote, I'm absolutely horrific at multitasking. This is very, very honest. Thank you. It's me too. So we said the next one is all those unclear processes. And in a lot of companies, you notice their processes are not very clear. And when this is the case, it forces the brain to redecide on the next step instead of running on the automatic procedural memory. So again, in companies, especially in young companies that started to grow, or even in bigger ones, we don't know exactly how to get from here to there. Even just creating a presentation, We know we have the information, and then very often we just default to some kind of presentation that we had and we use that as a roadmap. But a lot of things we do, there are so many unknowns, and this triggers the whole conflict monitoring in the ACC, which causes mental friction and fatigue. And this is how we generate and how we sustain this low-grade chronic stressors, and we stay stressed because we don't like uncertainty. And when we're stressed, our brain doesn't function as well as it should because, well, because it's stress. And this is a quite interesting study about that. And what we can take here is basically the task complexity, which kind of fills in for the unclear and redundant process situations and how it negatively influences cognitive load. And again, cognitive load has very serious long-term effects. And then we still have something that is unclear. It undermines a lot of things in our brain. And that ties into talks I've given before on goal setting or even on procrastination. Unclear processes, they undermine task clarity, and that lower self-efficacy and this ambiguity, not knowing how to do the next task. Locker and Latham basic goal setting theory that if we know exactly what to do and how to do it, our motivation increases and it's easier for us to do. I don't have it in here, which is BJ Fogg's model of motivation, that if it's easy to do and we know how to do it and it doesn't cost a lot of time, that is when we're way more motivated to do something than if it's complex, hard, and we don't know exactly how to do it. Yes. Anybody have any questions about that?
Just going back to the multitasking, Gwen. So I remember reading about the myth of multitasking. So you were
Yes.
saying about task switching. So we can
Yes.
listen to music while we're jogging. That's two things. But one of those things is in the background while the other one is something that you have to focus on.
Yes.
Whereas if you're on a Zoom call and you get an email coming in and you start to look at that while you're on the call, and then somebody says, "What do you think, Gwen?" All of a sudden you realize these two things where you're on a Zoom call and you're taking part in a meeting and your attention is looking at an email, then
Yes.
that's not really possible. So it's a bit of a
No.
myth, multitasking, isn't it?
Yes, it definitely is. It
Occurs to
definitely
me.
is. And it I think it really drains energy because again, it's the whole switching process that we don't do either of the two things properly. We can't do two things well at the same time.
Two controlled things.
Yes. Okay. So now we've covered the interruptions, the unclear processes, and now we go to redundant steps. And I thought this is really interesting because we often have tasks we do that don't seem important or we don't understand why they're important, or we have the feeling, okay, five people touch the same thing and it makes no sense that I do that. And those are very interesting. There's some newer research on that, is that if a task feels redundant or it's outside of our core duties, then employees are less motivated and job satisfaction goes down. And I think this is super interesting. And it's defined as required repetition without reward. It's like if you go to the gym and you lift weights and it's hard, but you don't have any muscle growth. And so there we have an increase of effort reward imbalance, which obviously leads to frustration and disengagement. And I think we can often see that with kids in school, especially when they're younger, the time between when they should start studying and when they get their final grades at the end of the year is so big that they're not able to compute that. And so their desire to study goes down as compared to if they would have a test every week, they would keep up studying. And that is for many of us, I think it's similar if something is so far away and it doesn't connect to what we want. And that goes back to this whole goal theory thing. And and take all of those together, we have an erosion of efficiency, and that is neural noise going up. And it's 25 to 30% of our performance goes down if we're interrupted and we need to restart. It takes much longer, and we take much longer to complete a task if we're interrupted. And then is this subjective fatigue. It's where we just really feel tired, which causes us to make mistakes, and we need to put in more effort, but we have more mistakes, which leads to a very high frustration level. And again, how does that play into our daily life? And if we have a high frequency of context switching, which slows down our thinking and fragments our focus. So again, if like yesterday, I was working on this presentation, my daughter kept on interrupting me. This leads to this feeling long-term to a mental overload and inefficiency. And a lot of people that I talk to that work in a big office space, they tell me it's just this one thing where people basically pop their head in. Do you have a minute? Can you just answer this? Can you do this? And those interruptions just prolong the process of working on this one task. And they make it harder for us to concentrate. And each time it takes longer to get back into the whole thought process we need to complete maybe a complex task. And then we have those complex workflows with redundant steps. So if we have this big project we're working on and we know those 10 things we need to do regularly and they're totally useless, but the company requires us to file this, this is a cause of frustration, and it really gnaws on our confidence, and we will not work as hard, and we have a drop in accuracy because it requires so much cognitive effort, and we increase the number of small mistakes that can creep in. Another thing is high information noise, and we've all dealt with that. We get information from everywhere. We have a Teams channel, we have a WhatsApp channel, we get emails, we have fellow co-workers that talk to us about it. We have meetings that put in information, and important signals can be buried, and it makes us recheck, it makes us double check, it makes us second guess ourselves in the short term, and in the long term we stop trusting our memory, and we stop trusting our decisions, and self-doubt creeps in. Another thing that leads to the erosion of efficiency in a really daily life example is if we have to put in a lot of work with very little reward. I used to work for a European EU organization, and a lot of young people, very talented people, would leave because they would put in so much work. They would have ideas, and they would try to contribute. And after a year, they realized no matter how much they work, the structure is so entrenched, there's no chance at all for them to get a promotion or to get some interesting projects, because that is just pushed around to people that have been there for a long time. And all the bureaucracy kind of starves off anything, any ideas to make this workplace a better place, or to make our product even better. And that leaves them feeling drained. Even, of course, because there are no results, they can't show, and this tears down any positive emotion that we have. And so long-term, motivation drops, people get disengaged, the risk of burnout drastically increases, and obviously talented people leave the company because they look for better places. And here's interesting research on that. It's open access, so it's easy to find. And so maybe we can just take a moment to question, so where do these microfrictions live in your work? Is it more interruptions? Is it unclear processes, redundant steps, all of them? and which ones of those are in your control. Like, for example, you can turn off notifications, and which of them are in the system, like people just, tapping your shoulder or popping their heads into your office. Okay, so if there are no questions, I'll go on.
Gwen,
Yes,
think about the micro frictions and emotional exhaustion and stress that you were talking about,
yes,
and the effect on our sense of control or even
yeah.
self-efficacy.
Mm-hmm.
I think the self-efficacy is a big one because in past experience, thinking about a very busy working life, you've got stresses where there are significant interruptions, individuals
Yes,
who need support and help, and so
yes,
on. So, what does the science say about quietening um, those parts of the brain, small interruptions affecting our sense of control when we don't really have control, but we want the sense of control? And what are a couple of practical things? Or perhaps that's coming later on your talk.
yes, definitely, because this is more about the brain, and the second talk is more about the person and what we can do about it.
Mm.
But the whole self-efficacy, as you said, I think is a big one because we start doubting ourselves, and it long term just kills our motivation. So it's not knowing why they feel bad about themselves. And we try to distract when actually it really doesn't have to be that way. And yes, we can start with turning off notifications. We can start having focus times and communicating that to our coworkers, saying, "Look, Monday morning from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock, my office door is closed and I really need focus time." And we put on noise canceling earphones and we protect that time because it's our brain that depends on that.
Mm. Think about open plan offices as well, where those
Yes,
noise cancelling could be quite useful.
quite useful. Yes, and there is some interesting research on the whole noise in those big office spaces, how they reduce efficiency and brain function.
Mm.
So, yeah, so let's look at some of the numbers. And so distracted employees, they commonly report stress, frustration, and reduced motivation. That's what we just said. But the number of people that complain about that, I think are really surprising because 70% of employees they cite chatty coworkers as a major distraction. And this comes from this research paper. That's where I got the numbers from. And so 80% report being distracted by general office noise. And that is again where noise canceling earphones are great. And especially amongst younger employees, smartphone use and just checking their own messages or even work messages ranks as the second largest distraction, which is nearly 69% of the workforce, which I find is surprising. And I think we've all heard about the research of how just having a smartphone open or even hidden on the table when taken an IQ test, it lowers the test results, the points that we get. Just seeing the phone there. Whereas if the phone is in the bag or in another room, we do much better, which I think is a really interesting finding. And I've never thought about that before going into this whole research on microfriction. So, and we have a workplace today where we have the opportunity to do home office for many of us, and still the notifications, the emails, or even reading our work emails when we're actually at home outside of our work time, and all of that gnaws again away at our capacity to process. So the big question there is office tech, is it good or evil? I've talked before about this whole attention economy that's there where everything competes for our attention. And so maybe if any of you would like to contribute to the discussion. Okay, so says for her, working from home distracts me more. And my husband says the same thing. He is more focused at work, at the office. Okay.
Actually, I believe that maybe the tech that we use at the office is not looked at as bad as the rest of personal use social media apps and whatnot, because it brings in capital for the workforce.
Yes.
So maybe it's not really spoken about because it would not make money for them. So I think that is looked over in a sense. It's not funded for as well, the research that's maybe investigating that. So yeah, that's my take on it. It's not really, I believe, especially at the workforce, at the workplace.
That's really interesting. That's a very interesting point. Yes. On the other hand, maybe it's the interruptions that we face at work, they ultimately do cost the company money because it makes us less efficient at work. And never mind the mental health costs that we discuss with distractions, how it eats away at our mental health long term. Anybody else? So is also the adaptive side of friction. So why could it possibly be good? So using the friction, especially if we are aware of it, we can use it to basically strengthen ourselves with this deliberate challenge, similar to muscle training. So we can use the same neural networks that fatigue under stress if we do it consciously and if we're aware of it, and which will decrease the stress it'll cause. It'll also make us more resilient. And there's something I came across here, which is the whole stress inoculation theory, and I know Sapolsky talks about it in his book Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and I really like the idea. And this is the predictable and moderate interruptions that we could call controlled stressors. And that is where we can train our executive control and our recovery speed. So instead of having it, bouncing at us all day, is if we say, okay, and for maybe that amount of time a day, I allow it on purpose just to train myself instead of, blocking it all out long term. And our experience and our mindset and how we view those things and how we view distractions and how aware we are of them, and also our belief in how fast we're able to recover has a big say on that. And it's a whole other topic where we can talk about self-efficacy and neuroplasticity, which is a little bit out of scope. I might go into that in the next talk, where how we can learn to deal with those things better. And I always like to tell people that our brains are not made for the type of life we live today, sitting all day, having this sedentary lifestyle, eating highly processed foods, being interrupted all the time, being distracted, having 5 different devices, trying to multitask. I'm sorry, I like to use teenagers for that because it's my own lived experience. You have a teenager, they will watch a TV show and they will scroll Instagram at the same time while doing their homework. And it stresses them and it makes them more sensitive, and they don't quite understand why. And this is where we can use this whole intentional part of it. So we can batch interruptions. It's like we can have meetings, we can have one day for meetings instead of fractioning our day with having one meeting at 10 o'clock and another one at 1 o'clock and another one at 4 o'clock. We can say, okay, maybe I'll use Mondays and I'll put most of my meetings, as many as I can, on Mondays so that I have less of them on another day. And I can say, okay, maybe Wednesdays I will just do deep work and I will switch off everything and I will just focus on that one project, or maybe divide the day into two, and I'll spend the morning working just on that one project where I really want to move the needle, and I'll use the later afternoon to just work on that other project where I really want to dive deep. Yes, and that definitely will reduce the friction and will reduce the drain. And our brain can learn, yeah, and we can just adapt to this whole new situation where friction really isn't the enemy, but we can say that if we don't manage our friction, it is definitely the enemy. And most of us live in a workspace where we don't manage that friction very intentionally. And again, if you're interested in some of the research, I really like this one that goes into glucocorticoid receptors, and any of us who love Sapolsky will really like this one. So closing thoughts. What we have in today's workplace is those micro frictions really show us the limits of our brains, and those really high numbers in burnout and stress levels and anxiety levels, they all feed into that. And a lot of it has to do with awareness. So we can use those micro frictions intentionally to strengthen us, to make us more resilient. But if we leave them unchecked, they can just break down our mental health long term. And of course, it's about intentionally using them and we can do it. We can use it for both sides, the personal as well as at work. And for all of us having kids, we know how easily we get distracted, or even our phones. Late in the evening, suddenly our phone bling, and suddenly we get sucked into work email. So unmanaged friction has a lot of bad sides and a lot of very negative consequences for us, which would be chronic stress, fatigue, or cognitive erosion, going down all the way to burnout, depression, anxiety. But again, if we manage them, we can use it as a training ground, as a playground to say, okay, and I want to learn to be more focused. I want to train myself to be more resilient. And we can use the workplace intentionally to become more resilient. And that is one of the big topics in my research life, is how can I use the workplace to become more resilient, to be happier. And I think work and happiness and resilience, they're not separate things. It all goes into one, because we're one human being. At home, we have this brain, and our body carries the brain to work, and we carry it back. And then we carry it maybe for dinner with our family, or to have fun, or to go to the gym. And so it's always the same us that carries that brain, and it's not just separate drawers. And so the goal here isn't really to just completely eliminate friction, because that will not happen. But we can engineer our lives around recovery, clarity, and build a system that works for us. So every tool, back to the question, is it good or evil? So every interruption, every process, or every tool can either drain us, or we can use it to develop us. And it just depends on how we design our environment and how we design how we think about things. So this is it. Thank you all so much.